Hi, it's Summer, and these are some Amethyst book recommendations. In each of these videos, I try to wear the color of the crystal that I'm going to be talking about. I don't have very much purple, but I recently thrifted this pullover that's like a lavender color. I'm obsessed with it. And then I also did some purple eyeshadow. So far, I've made 2 other crystal recommendation videos. I've done rose quartz and tiger's eye. I will link those in case you want to watch those as well. These recommendations are mostly just kind of going off of vibes. There are also certain things that are associated with crystals that also kind of correlate with the books. So that's kind of what I'm basing these recommendations off of. This is actually the February birthstone, so I thought it was kind of fitting to do this one close to February starting. It's also my birthstone because my birthday's in February, so I've always been kind of drawn to amethyst because of that. Amethyst is actually in the same crystal family as rose quartz, citrine, and regular clear quartz. From what I learned working at a crystal shop, they're all basically the same crystal, just a different color. They all have a really similar makeup. And metaphysically, amethyst is known for sleep, helping with anxiety, just helping you to feel peaceful. It's also associated with spirituality and becoming closer to your higher self. Amethyst books are my favorite kind of book. They're very whimsical and dreamlike, lots of magical realism, also kind of sleepy in a way. I don't know if that makes sense. So a lot of the books that I'm going to share have those qualities to them. Also, I know that a lot of these are really popular books, so you're probably not going to get any new recommendations out of this, but I'm still just going to mention them because I think this is just kind of a fun, silly video, so it's okay. I am, of course, first going to mention my favorite book, which is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This book is definitely very whimsical and dreamlike, both in the imagery and also the writing style. This book I think would be considered portal fantasy. It's also dark academia because it follows the main character Zachary, who's a college student. One day in his university library, he finds a book that has a story about him inside of it. He has no idea how this is possible, and so it's just kind of an adventure of him trying to figure out where this book came from, why he's in it, and also the significance of the moment in his life it's written about in the book. This is a book about other books. It's about a secret underground labyrinth library. It's about bees and keys and swords and time and fate and owls. It's so good. And it 100% is what I think of when I think of an amethyst book. Next up, I have The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. It's been a minute since I've read this one. I read this back in probably 2016 or something, but I remember just loving it. From what I do remember though, this is very whimsical, lots of magical realism, and kind of dreamlike writing, which I feel is what Neil Gaiman is kind of best at. He writes a lot of fairy tale-esque things, which I feel is very amethyst coded. I'm gonna see if I can remember the plot of this book. Really mainly what I remember are the vibes, and that I loved the characters. And also that it's a little bit sad, which I feel is also very amethyst. I feel fantasy with a touch of sadness is totally amethyst. From what I can remember, this follows a young boy moving to a new house, and he befriends one of the neighbor girls who's around his same age. And I think there's something kind of mystical about her. And I also think there's a pond at the end of the lane that they live at, which is where the title comes from. The inside flap says it's a novel of childhood and memory. It's a story of magic, about the power of stories, and how we face the darkness inside each of us. It's about fear and love and death and families. But fundamentally, I hope at its heart, it's a novel about survival. I also really highly recommend the audiobook for this one because Neil Gaiman narrates it himself. This is one that I would love to reread sometime soon to see if it's still a favorite, because I gave this 5 stars when I first read it. But if you haven't read this one yet, I definitely recommend it. This is honestly one of the first books that I thought of when I was coming up with this crystal recommendation concept, because this series as a whole is such an amethyst series. It's The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This follows a girl named Blue who lives in a house of psychics. She herself isn't a psychic, but she can amplify the powers of the women she lives with. She becomes friends with a group of boys called the Raven Boys. They all go on this adventure to find a Welsh king. There's so much more to this book and this series than just that. The writing style is just beautiful, very flowery and descriptive, and I just love that type of writing. The Starless Sea and The Ocean at the End of the Lane, I would say, also have that writing style. There are a lot of scenes in this series that feel very dreamlike, and there's also a lot in this series about dreams, especially book 2, which is my favorite out of the series. Also, there are a lot of scenes that happen in this magical forest, and I feel all of those scenes really felt dreamlike to me. This has a lot of paranormal aspects to it, also a lot of tarot cards and psychic things, which Amethyst is kind of tied to psychic abilities and stuff like that. The vibes of this book are totally Amethyst. I feel like visually when I'm like thinking of what the book would look like to me, like the characters and the scenes and stuff, and also just the covers of them, I feel like it's kind of giving moss agate. But I don't think I'm gonna do like a moss agate book recommendations. So I just thought I'd throw that in. It just feels like moss agate to me as well as Amethyst. Next up, I have The Dreamers by Karen Thompson Walker. The title of this being The Dreamers just screams Amethyst. This is kind of like a sci-fi story about a town who has this sickness that starts going around where people fall asleep. People are staying asleep for a really long time and they eventually die. From what I remember, this follows multiple people in the town and their experience with this sickness, what people are trying to do to stop it or to escape it. It literally is about sleeping and dreaming, and so that's kind of where I tie it to Amethyst. It has been a minute since I've read this, but from what I remember, it does feel a little bit kind of like slower and dreamlike and literary at times. I feel like this is one that you might not have heard of, so this could be a fun one to try. This next one, I feel like I never hear anyone talk about anymore, and it's Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. I love this book. I need to reread it. I need to continue in the series. This is such an Amethyst book. This is about gods and alchemy. It's about a lost city. I guess this might also be considered dark academia because we're following a scholar named Laszlo Strange, who I think is being sent to investigate this lost city. No one can even remember its name. Also, just like the title says, there are a lot of things that have to do with dreams in this book. This is a very whimsical, dreamlike, sleepy, touch of melancholy kind of fantasy. It's very haunting. It's such a good book, such a good fantasy story, and it's definitely an Amethyst book. And then my last book on this list is The Invisible Life of Adeline Laroo by B.E. Schwab. This one is very, very popular. This is about the main character, Adeline, who back in the 1700s made a wish, or kind of like a deal with the devil, that backfired, and now she's immortal and no one can remember her. So we get to see pretty much her whole life and how this has affected her. And then we also get to see her current day. It's kind of interesting to see how she's kind of dealt with the inconvenience of no one remembering you and how she has managed to live her life. And one day she finds someone who does remember her and you get to see their story. The way that Addie is written and how her interactions with people are described, where she's almost just kind of like a ghost to people and there's only traces of her left behind. There's a portion of this book where it kind of talks about her trying to leave her mark and trying to like leave some sign behind that she has existed, and how she does that through people. So I feel like through that it kind of feels a little bit dreamlike. I also remember the writing style being kind of flowery like the other books, and also I feel like any book that has fantasy in it automatically is kind of like an Amethyst book to me. So this is kind of contemporary slash historical fiction, but it does have that kind of whimsical, magical side to it. Definitely an Amethyst book. While I was compiling this list, I had so many other books that I was like, I haven't read that yet, but I have a feeling that it would be on this list. So I thought that I would just kind of throw in some Amethyst book predictions that I have. My first prediction is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is the same author as The Starless Sea. So just because I already know what the writing style is like, that immediately already kind of makes me think that this will be an Amethyst book. Also, just with this being very like magical realism-y from what I've heard, I just really feel like this might be an Amethyst book. My next prediction is The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. The inside flap of this one says, Lee Chen Sanders is absolutely certain about one thing. When her mother died by suicide, she turned into a bird. So this is like a magical realism story about grief. I feel like the imagery and the writing in this one is going to just be beautiful. It also has that kind of touch of sadness that I feel like goes along with Amethyst books. I definitely am going to need to be in the right mindset for this because I know that it's probably going to wreck me, but I also know that it's probably going to be like 5 stars. And I also just feel like it's going to be an Amethyst book. And then my last prediction is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. This is also a 5-star prediction for me, and also an Amethyst prediction. I feel like I don't even completely know what this book is about. I know that it follows a lot of different perspectives and different timelines, and I want to say that it has like some magical realism to it. I'm also thinking it might be about a book within a book. I don't really have a whole lot of reasons behind why I think this is going to be an Amethyst book, but I just kind of think it is. Maybe part of it is that I listened to a little bit of the beginning of this one and just kind of soft DNF'd it at the time because I just wasn't in the mood for it. But from what I remember, the writing style is kind of similar to the other books that I've talked about. So we'll have to see if I'm right with these eventually. If you made it to the end of the video, leave a crystal ball emoji in the comments. Also in the comments, let me know if you have a book that you feel like is an Amethyst book. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
Appalachian sunrise meets my